It's U.S. history again. Boy, I miss that. And I miss all of you. Hope you're doing well. But want to boogie along, and we are actually going to finish the chapter today. Believe it or not. Um, and then we'll have one more chapter to go, and we're also going to have a project that I will be telling you about on Friday. We'll discuss all of this as it comes up. But we talked about the end of Operation Desert Storm and the Gulf War as it has become known. And one of the things that came out of that was Gulf War syndrome. Now, you may or may not have heard of this. You may know some people that had Gulf War syndrome. And here were and this had never really happened like this before. You had 60,000, excuse me, of the 500,000 veterans had these symptoms. Strange, right? The symptoms included muscle and joint pain, also memory loss, headaches, and sleep disorders. So you couldn't sleep, you had some memory loss, and especially the muscle and joint pain. A lot of people had that, headaches. And so they put together a presidential advisory committee. The Presidential Advisory Committee looked into it. And one of the things that soldiers were saying it could have been, after the war was over, as the Iraqis were leaving Kuwait, they set some of the oil fields or hard to say, oil wells on fire. And so you can imagine a lot of smoke, a lot of just nastiness in the air, just turned things black. A lot of the soldiers were saying that was what caused it. Also, we believed and knew that on these Scud missiles, they were putting chemical weapons. And we had gas masks for all of our soldiers, but a lot of people thought, well, maybe we've had some minor exposure to some of these chemical weapons, some of these deadly chemicals that's causing them. But this Presidential Advisory Committee said, no, it's not that. It must just be the stress and the trauma of war. How do I keep from running my mouth here? Yeah, the government saying, because if it were something like that they were exposed to, then somebody might come back and say, well, y'all put us in that predicament, help us out, give us some money. And so therefore the government says, it's just the stress. And a lot of people say that the Presidential Advisory Committee was a cover-up. So interesting stuff. If you ever get a chance, read on it. Obviously, by my facial expressions, you probably know my opinion on that. But either way, sad stuff, and a lot of soldiers still to this day that were in that war will have these headaches and muscle issues, some severe. I've watched videos before and watched specials, television specials on some of these soldiers that, man, it's really just messed up their lives. So pray for them. My goodness gracious. But we're going to get into President Bush. We talked about his foreign policy. Let's get back to the domestic issue, savings and loans. We had a failure of several of our nation's savings and loans branches. Now, it was bad investments, unsound investments, as your book calls it. Also, declining oil prices. The price of oil slipped, and it caused several of these to file bankruptcy. And the government would underwrite these institutions. So it demanded a bailout of sorts. The government spent about $300 billion, and your book breaks it down for us, $300,000 per adult taxpayer to cover the debt of these savings and loans. That was one of the problems that Bush had. Another one was the Americans with Disabilities Act. Now, we don't think about it nowadays. We really don't. It's almost become a given. If you pull up to a church, you pull up to a business, if there are steps going into this business, you have to have a handicapped ramp, a wheelchair ramp, whatever you want to call it. Well, back before then, before the Americans with Disabilities Act, it wasn't mandatory. Businesses, government buildings did not have to make account of people with disabilities. And so Bush originally, he said, I'm against this. It's going to be regulation. It's going to cause a lot of problems for our businesses, a lot of cost for our businesses and for our government buildings. He was against it. Finally, there was enough pressure. And it also said no job discrimination. You couldn't discriminate against people with disabilities. I mean, rightly so. But he was against it. And finally, there was enough pressure that he signed it. And then you have the problem of, you've heard you can't win for losing. Well, that's what Bush experienced. The people that said that he only signed it because of public pressure, they said he's not a very compassionate person. And the people that were for it to begin with, when he signed it, now they said, look, you've opened the door for lawsuits. I mean, you just can't win in that form or fashion. And Bush goes through that. And that was one of the big things of his office, but it was passed, it was signed, and nowadays, rightly so, you go to a government building or you go to a business, there has to be some way for a person with a wheelchair or disability to have easier access to it. So, makes sense to me. But Bush balked at it for a while. Also under the Bush administration was the 27th Amendment. 27th Amendment technically would have been the 11th Amendment if Madison had had his way. Madison, as your book talks about, he had proposed 12 amendments instead of 10. We know the first 10 is the Bill of Rights. He proposed 12. One of those had to do with representation. He thought that in the House of Representatives, for every 30,000 individuals, you needed one representative. And then it graduated. It got less and less. You would up to 40,000 the next one. And it was never approved. If it had have been approved today in the House of Representatives, there would be about 5,500 people as opposed to 430. 5,500 people would be in the House of Representatives. You would have to hold the House meetings in a baseball stadium or a football stadium, something like that, football field. But anyway, that didn't happen, but that would have been number 12. Number 11 was the fact that if you are in the Senate or in the House and you are going to vote yourself in a pay raise, you couldn't do that. Here's the way it worked, is Madison said, hey, here's the way we need to do it. If you vote for a raise now, so I'm a representative, I vote, yeah, I think we ought to give ourselves a 25% pay raise. Then it cannot take effect until the next election has been held. So in other words, for the House, every 2 years. So I vote myself a raise in today. I'm a House of Representatives. We ought to give the people the right to speak on that. And they may say, well, Representative Lee, he voted himself in a raise. Who does he think he is? I'm going to vote against him. And so I never get the raise. The next person that fills my spot gets the raise. So it kept Congress kind of honest. And what had happened, they had voted themselves a huge pay raise. Congress had. And so there was a push for the 27th Amendment. And finally it was ratified. May the 7th, 1992, Michigan became the 38th state to ratify it. It became the Constitution, part of the Constitution. So that was one of the big things. They had actually in 1989 they voted themselves not only a pay raise but adjustments for inflation in there. So yeah. But we've talked about the next part. If you'll look at page 588, and we've been, of course, I think I mentioned it, but on 586 and 587 or 587. On page 588, you're going to see, and we've talked about this ad nauseum in class, about Bush breaking his campaign promise. And we watched a video on that. Read my lips, no new taxes. Well, Congress thought, hey, we've got a deficit growing here. Why don't we raise taxes to work on that? And Bush went along with it. It made people furious. His approval rating after the Gulf War was 87%. I mean, just unbelievably high. 87% of the people approve of the way he's handling things. Well, by the time the election rolls around, it's going to be right at around 40%. But at the time that Democrats started fielding candidates for the Democrat primary, his approval rating was still way up there. None of your big league candidates really ran. It was all new folks. One of those new folks was a guy by the name of Bill Clinton. Now, Bill Clinton was from Arkansas, Bill Clinton, and Bill Clinton was kind of shady. In fact, these savings and loans things, they investigated several people, thought that the savings and loan deal was kind of corrupt. Bill Clinton was actually one of the people investigated for the savings and loans. Can you believe that? They also accused him of alleged sexual immorality. Your book lists these. Marijuana use. They say he was a draft dodger during the Vietnam War, went to Oxford to get out of the war, and that he was part of this savings and loans deal, all kinds of stuff. He had all kinds of shady dealings in Arkansas, maybe even had some people killed. I didn't say that. It was just a joke, Hillary. But anyway, people would call him out on these shenanigans, and they would say, look at your past, and he just kind of shrugged it off. And the thing that got him elected, he ran as a centrist. Well, two things got him elected. One was H. Ross Perot, and you'll see him in your book listed as billionaire Ross Perot. He was against politics as usual. Now look, we're tired of this politics as usual. And so Ross Perot ran, and he's going to get a big chunk of Bush's vote. But Bill Clinton ran as a new Democrat. He said, I'm not your typical tax and spend Democrat. I want to balance the budget. I want to stop the big tax and spend policies of the Democrats. Yeah. And for the second part of his term, he was the revolution, the Newt Gingrich revolution. We'll get into that later on. We'll get into Clinton's office. But during the election, Bush said, hey, Clinton, he's a moral failed person. He's got a lot of baggage with him. Ross Perot focused on, I'm not a politician. In fact, when you look at Perot's campaign, he was kind of like the first Trump. He wanted to drain the swamp, so to speak. And then Clinton, because you have no Cold War anymore, we don't have a need for a lot of fears outside of our country anymore. In the last war we fought in, the Gulf War, we just whooped everybody real quick. And so people are concerned with the economy. They're concerned with college. They're concerned with jobs. They're concerned with medical issues. And Bill Clinton ran on that. And I mentioned the sign in his office, campaign office, that said, "Is the economy stupid?" And that was what over and over he went on that. Election day, as I mentioned, 40% approval for President Bush. And H. Ross Perot got 19% of the popular vote. And you'll see a little map on page 588 that shows the electoral division. You see that Alabama and Mississippi went for Bush. You had the surrounding states went for Clinton. Clinton only got 43% of the popular vote. Ross Perot got 19%. Bush got 37%. But Clinton won the Electoral College, and that's all that matters according to the Constitution. But a lot of people looked at Clinton as, hey, you only have 43% of the people backing you. So he was kind of climbing out of a hole to begin with. We will get into the Clinton administration coming up in our next chapter, but when we get there. But here's what I want you to do for today. First of all, I mentioned about Zoom. I want you to make sure you've got access to that. I know a lot of you have already used it, and I want you to write down, if you live in the Central Time Zone, as I do, 2 p.m. Central on Friday. 2 p.m. Central on Friday. If you live in the Eastern Time Zone, I want you to write down 3 p.m. Eastern Daylight Savings Time on Friday. Write those down. I'm going to try to have a class meeting with all of us on Friday. At that time, I want to talk, get to see each other's faces, hear each other's voices for just a moment, and talk about a project you've got coming up. Good senior level project, junior and senior level. So we will do that on Friday, 2 p.m. Central, 3 p.m. Eastern on Friday. Tomorrow, Wednesday, we are going to review for a test. On Thursday, we are going to have a test, and I will tell you more about that tomorrow when we review just a little bit via video, and I'll tell you what you need to look for in your review. But tomorrow review, Thursday test, Friday class meeting. For tonight, on page 589, these glasses are terrible, the lighting's terrible. Page 589, but you can see where it looks like 533 if you squint. Page 589, there's a section quiz with 5 questions. Don't do the star. Don't write down the questions, but I want you to submit those 5 answers to me. That is worth 5 points. The total project is worth 10. What's the other 5 points for? I want you can rewind the video and take a picture of you watching it. That'll be fine. You can take a picture of you reading those couple of pages in your textbook, or have someone take a picture of you doing that, or take a picture of yourself, or have someone take it of you completing the section quiz. So you will submit both a picture of you, and look decent in it, please. It's worth 5 points. The picture is. The section quiz is worth 5, total of 10 points up for grabs at stake today. Please do this, and please note that your pictures could, over the next couple of weeks, end up on Facebook. It might even go viral if you look cool enough. Anyway, that is it for today. I've ran a little long. I wanted to stop at 15 minutes, at 16 minutes. But listen, y'all have a great day. Praying for you. Love y'all. Miss y'all. And get this work done. Get it turned in. Y'all are doing great. And just keep up the good work. Don't slack. We're getting close to the end of school. Be here before you know it. Bye.